"Come out here. I'm being killed." Those were Timothy Treadwell's final words, captured on a camera with the lens cap still on. Outside his tent, a 1,000-pound grizzly bear had attacked, dragging him into the brush as his partner, Amie Huguenard, screamed in the dark. She tried to fight it off with a frying pan. It was October 5th, 2003, Katmai National Park, Alaska. After 13 summers living among wild bears, Timothy's luck and life ran out. This is the story of how admiration turned into obsession, and how nature, indifferent and brutal, finally reminded him who truly ruled the wild. Timothy Treadwell didn't die in a zoo, or on a guided expedition, or behind the lens of a documentary crew. He died alone in the wilderness, with only one person by his side, and only wild animals for company. And that was exactly how he wanted it. For 13 consecutive summers, Treadwell lived among the grizzly bears of Katmai National Park in Alaska. No fences, no tranquilizer guns, no backup team, just a tent, a video camera, and a deep, unwavering belief that he could connect with some of the most powerful predators on Earth. He called them his friends, gave them names like Mr. Chocolate, Thumper, and Aunt Melissa. He claimed they trusted him, that he understood them, that they knew he wasn't a threat. He said he was there to protect them, from poachers, tourists, and park bureaucrats, from human greed. But in the end, it wasn't a human who took his life. It was a bear. What makes this story so compelling and so controversial isn't just the violence of his death. It's the quiet, almost poetic way he lived before it, the sincerity of his mission, and the haunting irony of its ending. Timothy believed love was stronger than fear, that if you showed kindness to wild animals, they would return it. He believed he could rewrite the relationship between man and predator, not through domination, but through connection. To many, he was brave, passionate, idealistic, a true wildlife advocate willing to risk his life for the animals he adored. To others, he was reckless, delusional, a man blinded by his own ego, projecting human emotions onto creatures that operate by instinct, not sentiment. Even Amie Huguenard, his girlfriend and the second victim in this tragedy, had confided in friends that she was afraid of the bears. She trusted Timothy, but not the animals themselves. And in the end, her trust in him would cost her everything. What happened in Katmai wasn't a sudden twist of fate. It was a slow-burning tension between philosophy and reality, between dreams and danger, between love and nature's indifference. Timothy saw himself as a protector, a kind warrior, a guardian of animals that couldn't speak for themselves. But the wilderness does not speak in human terms. And in October of 2003, at the very end of another long season in bear country, nature spoke in the only language it knew, without mercy, without warning, and without apology. There is no villain in this story, no dramatic betrayal, just a man who spent years walking a tightrope over something ancient and powerful, until the day he slipped. What remains is not just a gruesome death, but a profound question. Can we ever truly coexist with predators we do not control? Or do we inevitably become the prey, once we forget the boundaries that have always kept us safe? This is not just the story of how Timothy Treadwell died. It's the story of why he lived the way he did, and what it ultimately cost him. Before he was the Grizzly Man, Timothy Treadwell was just a man named Timothy Dexter. He was born in 1957 in Long Island, New York, raised in a middle-class household. By all accounts, his childhood was normal, even happy. But something in him always leaned toward the dramatic. He loved attention, he loved performing, and he hated feeling ordinary. As a young man, Timothy moved to California with dreams of fame. He auditioned for television roles, even reportedly coming close to landing the role of Woody on Cheers. But the break never came. His acting career fizzled before it began. In the years that followed, Timothy spiraled. He developed a drinking problem, then a drug addiction. He worked odd jobs. He floated between cities and identities. For a time, he even legally changed his last name to Treadwell, a tribute, he said, to a British ancestry he may have invented. He was lost, directionless, drowning. And then, something changed. In the late 1980s, after a near-fatal overdose, Timothy said he had a spiritual awakening. He traveled to Alaska, where he saw a wild grizzly bear for the first time. That moment, alone, in the vastness of Katmai, was a turning point. He later claimed the bear saved his life. From that day on, he made the bears his purpose. He returned to Katmai National Park every summer, spending weeks, then months, alone among the grizzlies. He studied their movements, documented their behavior, spoke to them, gave them names, and filmed everything. Out of this came Grizzly People, his nonprofit organization focused on bear education and protection. He visited schools, appeared on talk shows, and published his journals. For many, he became a passionate and unconventional voice for wildlife advocacy. For others, he was a deeply troubled man projecting his personal needs onto the natural world. Treadwell's identity became inseparable from the bears. He dressed in camouflage, mimicked bear postures, and even claimed he would die for them, if necessary. He refused bear spray, declined to carry weapons, and often broke national park rules, camping in areas too close to feeding grounds, returning to the same sites year after year. He believed the bears knew him, respected him, even loved him. But that belief wasn't just spiritual, it was psychological. Experts later suggested that Timothy may have suffered from delusional thinking. He wasn't trained as a wildlife biologist. He had no formal survival background. But in his mind, he had become part of the ecosystem, a self-appointed guardian who could bridge the gap between species. Then came Amie Huguenard. She met Timothy in the late 1990s. A medical doctor, intelligent and reserved, Amie was drawn to his passion, but wary of his methods. She accompanied him to Katmai several times, despite her fear of the bears. Her journals later revealed a woman torn between admiration and unease. Still, she followed him back into the wild. In 2003, during what would become their final trip, they stayed longer than ever, well into October. The salmon were gone, the bears were agitated, and the weather was turning. Timothy insisted on staying. Because by then, the bears weren't just his mission, they were his identity, and he couldn't walk away, even when everything told him he should. Katmai National Park is not a place for the faint of heart. Located in a remote stretch of southern Alaska, it spans over 4 million acres of untamed wilderness, an area larger than Yellowstone and Yosemite combined. There are no roads in or out, no marked trails, no cell service. To reach Katmai, you need a bush plane. To survive it, you need respect. Katmai is famous for two things: volcanoes and bears. The park is home to the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, a surreal ash-covered landscape formed after a massive volcanic eruption in 1912. But it's the wildlife, especially the bears, that draws people in. Katmai supports one of the densest brown bear populations on Earth. Estimates suggest more than 2,000 grizzlies roam its terrain, many of them concentrated near rivers during salmon season. These are not zoo animals or national park mascots. These are wild coastal brown bears, larger than their inland cousins, heavier, and more territorial. Many of them reach 900 pounds or more. The biggest males can exceed 1,000. And when the salmon run is high, they feast. When the fish vanish, they fight. Each summer, bears gather at Brooks Falls, where iconic photos capture them leaping into waterfalls to snatch fish mid-air. It's one of the few places in the world where humans can observe grizzlies from relatively close range, as long as they stay on raised viewing platforms, keep their distance, and follow strict park protocols. Timothy Treadwell didn't follow those protocols. Instead of staying on platforms, he walked the riverbanks. He camped on game trails. He nestled into the same meadows the bears used to rest and feed, and he returned to the same spots year after year, despite warnings from rangers that this could cause bears to become habituated to his presence, or worse, to associate humans with trust. Timothy called his chosen area the Grizzly Maze, a tangle of alder thickets, brush, marshes, and streams deep in Katmai's backcountry. It was breathtaking. It was quiet, and it was incredibly dangerous. Unlike the more monitored parts of the park, the maze was unpredictable. Bears could appear from anywhere. Visibility was limited. In some areas, tall grass and brush grew taller than a man. The terrain changed with each season. Paths disappeared, food sources shifted, territory lines blurred. Most bear experts agree, you never want to surprise a grizzly. In the maze, that was a constant risk. And in October, when most park visitors and bears had long since moved on, Timothy and Amie chose to stay behind. The salmon were mostly gone. The weather was colder, and the only bears remaining were the older, more aggressive males, the ones struggling to find food before hibernation. That decision, to linger deep into fall in a place known for limited visibility and close bear encounters, was critical. It meant fewer escape routes. It meant hungrier bears. And it meant that when a predator finally made its move, there would be no witnesses, no help, and no second chances. Katmai is one of the last true wildernesses on Earth, but wilderness does not forgive human error. The animal that killed Timothy Treadwell was not a monster. It was a grizzly bear, Ursus arctos horribilis, a coastal brown bear native to the Alaskan Peninsula. Not a rogue killer, not an anomaly, simply a predator doing what predators do when the rules of nature apply and human illusion is stripped away. By the time Treadwell returned to Katmai in late summer 2003, most bears had already begun their retreat inland, guided by instinct and hunger. The salmon run was nearing its end. The days were colder, the food scarcer, and the bears that remained in the maze were not the photogenic families tourists had captured at Brooks Falls in July. They were older, larger, more desperate. The male that attacked Treadwell was later identified through necropsy. Park rangers assigned him a number, Bear 141, an untagged adult male, estimated weight 1,000 to 1,200 pounds, height over 7 feet standing. Inside his stomach, investigators found fingers, hair, fragments of clothing, and Amie Huguenard's partially consumed remains. He was not one of Treadwell's named companions, not one of the bears filmed or spoken to like an old friend. He was new to the area, drawn, most likely, by the scent of food, the shifting territories, and the sheer necessity of survival. Grizzly bears are not inherently aggressive toward humans, but they are opportunistic. Their behavior is shaped by instinct, hunger, and environmental conditions, not sentiment. In a typical Alaskan summer, bears can consume tens of thousands of calories per day, mainly from sockeye salmon. When salmon are abundant, bears grow fat quickly, often gaining hundreds of pounds in weeks. But if the salmon run is weak, late, or ending, as it was that October, bears face a critical threshold. The biology of hibernation demands preparation. A bear that fails to gain sufficient weight before winter may not survive. That urgency transforms its behavior. It becomes more territorial, more unpredictable, and more willing to take risks. Treadwell had chosen to remain in the maze well past the safe window. By then, most humans, photographers, rangers, other researchers, had left the park. The bears that remained were not used to people. They had not been named. They had not been conditioned. They were ruled by a different code. Bear 141 likely did not see Timothy and Amie as fellow inhabitants of the wild. He saw them as meat. Soft, slow-moving, unfamiliar, and alone. It's worth understanding the psychology of predatory encounters. Bears don't always roar or bluff charge. Often, the most dangerous attacks come silently. A single bite from a grizzly can shatter a human skull. Their jaws can crack moose femurs. Their claws, up to 4 inches long, are not for climbing. They are weapons. And contrary to common myths, bears do not always kill cleanly. When hungry, they may begin feeding while the prey is still alive. It's a fact researchers rarely discuss publicly, out of respect for victims. But in nature, death is not always quick. It is rarely merciful. Timothy Treadwell refused to carry bear spray. He refused to erect electric fences. He rejected deterrence because he believed that peace and trust were the only tools he needed. But peace was not what Bear 141 had come for. The bear's presence was not an act of aggression. It was an act of ecology. It was hunger, biology, and proximity colliding in a single, irreversible moment. No one can say for sure what made that bear attack that night, but the science offers possibilities. An unfamiliar scent, a surprise encounter, or simply the calculus of starvation. In the grizzly world, survival comes first. Every calorie counts, and in October, the margin for error disappears. To Timothy, the bears were companions. To the bear, he was calories. And when those two realities finally collided, it didn't happen in anger. It happened because nature, when pushed too far, reminds us that it never agreed to our terms. October 5th, 2003. The weather in Katmai had turned. Cold rain swept across the brush. Visibility dropped. The salmon had thinned. The bears that remained were scavenging aggressively, competing for scraps, fueled by pre-hibernation urgency. Against this backdrop, Timothy Treadwell and Amie Huguenard had made a fateful decision: to stay. They had just returned to the camp after a brief break in town, but rather than head home for the season, as they had originally planned, Timothy insisted on returning to the Grizzly maze, despite rising tensions among the bears and growing signs of food scarcity. Their tent was pitched dangerously close to a known bear trail. Nearby, they stored packs of food, poorly secured. There was no electric fence, no bear spray, no firearm, nothing between them and the wild. At approximately 6 p.m., they recorded their final footage. Casual observations, complaints about park rangers, scenes of fog rolling in over the meadow. The camera was left in standby mode, packed away, but still armed with audio. What happened next was not filmed, but it was heard. At around 11:45 p.m., the attack began. On the recovered 6-minute tape, the lens cap remained on, but the microphone picked up everything. First, heavy rustling. Then, Timothy's voice, urgent, strained, mid-struggle. "Get out here! I'm being killed out here!" A guttural growl follows. Wet impacts, labored breathing, flesh tearing. Amie, still inside the tent, screams his name repeatedly. She doesn't run. She doesn't hide. She grabs a frying pan, the only object within reach, and rushes toward the noise. "Fight back! Hit it!" She swings, over and over, the sound of metal striking bone, or fur, or both. The bear does not retreat. Experts who reviewed the tape later said it was not a sudden ambush. Timothy was alive and conscious for at least the first 2 minutes of the attack. Amie's screams, panicked, raw, are met with more growls, more thrashing. She pleads with him, "Play dead, Tim. Lay still." He doesn't respond again. Then silence. A moment of nothing but rain. And breathing. Heavy. Not human. The bear had returned to feed. At some point, Amie retreats to the tent. The microphone records her alone, sobbing, hyperventilating. 30 seconds pass. Then the bear comes back. The final moments on the tape are frantic. Zipper noises. Screams. Then a new struggle. It is believed that the bear killed Amie shortly after. Her body was later found partially buried under brush, cached as food. Timothy's remains were located nearby, scattered, partially consumed. The following morning, bush pilot Willie Fulton arrived to pick them up. From the air, he noticed a bear circling the camp. On foot, he found a torn tent, an overturned cook pot, and the unmistakable smell of blood. He radioed for help and retreated to the plain. Rangers arrived later that day. One bear, an older, aggressive male, charged them. They shot and killed it. Inside its stomach, they found human remains. A second bear, acting erratically, was also put down. The tape was recovered from the tent. Authorities later said it was the most disturbing scene they had ever processed in Katmai. There was no mystery about what happened, no ambiguity. Timothy Treadwell's final moments were not heroic. They were not cinematic. They were terrifying, brutal, prolonged. A man and a woman, unarmed, unprotected, and unprepared, caught in the jaws of a creature that neither loved nor hated them. Just one that was hungry. Autopsy reports confirmed the timeline. Timothy had been killed first, likely within minutes of the initial attack. His injuries were consistent with sustained mauling, bite wounds to the head, neck, and upper torso. Amie's body told a different story. Her injuries suggested hesitation, a struggle, time. Some experts believe she survived up to 5 minutes after Timothy, possibly more. Long enough to fight, long enough to run. But she didn't. She stayed. She was found near the tent, partially consumed and cached under brush, a common bear behavior for saving food. In the hours that followed, the area was secured. Evidence was collected. The camera and tape were turned over to Alaska State Troopers. Timothy's and Amie's remains were airlifted back to Anchorage, then transported to their families. The National Park Service released a statement calling the deaths tragic, but avoidable. Behind the scenes, the mood was grim. Rangers had warned Treadwell for years. Do not treat wild animals like friends. Do not ignore regulations. Do not linger past the salmon run. Do not feed, touch, or approach grizzlies under any circumstance. Timothy had broken every rule, and now 2 people are dead. 2 bears too. All of it is unnecessary. All of it is irreversible. There were no survivors, no witnesses beyond the audio. But the aftermath left scars far beyond the physical. For the park staff, the message was clear. Passion without discipline is dangerous. For the scientific community, it was a case study in boundary collapse. What happens when humans imagine they are part of a wild system that does not recognize them as such? And for the world watching, it was a brutal reminder of a truth too often ignored. Nature is not your friend. The news broke quietly at first. 2 campers killed by a grizzly in Alaska. But within days, the story was everywhere. Headlines used words like devoured, eaten alive, tragic, and avoidable. Photos of Timothy smiling beside massive bears circulated online and in newspapers across the globe. Footage from his own camera, of him speaking gently to wild predators, made its way into news segments. Viewers were stunned. Some were heartbroken. Others were outraged. Few stories in modern wildlife history have divided public opinion so completely. To some, Timothy Treadwell was a martyr, an impassioned conservationist who died protecting the animals he loved. They saw courage in his choices, commitment in his actions. They viewed his death as a tragic consequence of a pure but misunderstood mission. But to others, he was reckless. A showman. A man who crossed boundaries not because he didn't understand the danger, but because he chose to ignore it. Wildlife biologists and park rangers were quick to issue statements. Many had warned Treadwell in the past, repeatedly. His behavior violated multiple federal guidelines. He camped too close to feeding areas. He stayed beyond the safe season. He refused to use deterrents. And most critically, he treated grizzlies not as wild animals, but as companions. Their criticism wasn't personal. It was professional. His actions, they said, endangered both people and bears. The 2 animals killed following the attack were not at fault. They were simply doing what hungry bears do. But now they were dead too, because of human choices. Amid the scientific backlash, there was a quieter, deeper grief. For the families left behind, the loss was absolute. Timothy's parents, Valerie and Carol, mourned not only their son, but the man he had become. They had watched his transformation from troubled youth to passionate activist with hope, even pride. His mother later said, "He found peace out there. He found purpose." But Amie Huguenard's death struck a different chord. Friends and colleagues described her as quiet, brilliant, and deeply private. A physician's assistant, she had worked in hospitals and trauma wards. Her love for Timothy was clear, but so was her discomfort with the bears. She had expressed concerns to friends. In her journals, she wrote of fear, of wanting to leave early, of feeling unsafe. She died anyway. Some questioned whether she had felt pressured to stay, whether her trust in Timothy overrode her instincts, whether she had gone into the wild not as a believer, but as a follower. We will never know for certain. Her voice was never heard publicly. Her final choices remain wrapped in silence. As public reaction intensified, filmmaker Werner Herzog began piecing together a documentary using Treadwell's 100-plus hours of self-shot footage. The result, Grizzly Man, was released in 2005. It portrayed Timothy not as a hero or a fool, but as a man consumed by his own mythology, a man whose love for nature blurred into obsession. Herzog, upon hearing the audio of the attack, famously advised Timothy's friend to destroy the tape. "You must never listen to this," he said. "It is the sound of hell." The film brought renewed attention to the case and reignited debate. Was Timothy Treadwell a prophet, a narcissist, a visionary, a victim? In the years that followed, his story became something larger than itself. A cautionary tale, a campfire warning, a subject of academic study. But beneath all the arguments and analysis, two people died in agony. Alone, in the dark, in a place where few humans had ever walked, and where none had ever lingered so long, so vulnerably, and so defiantly. The emotional fallout remains complicated. It is not clean. It is not cinematic. It is a collision between human passion and ecological reality, and it leaves us with a question far more uncomfortable than the violence itself. What happens when our love for the wild becomes blind to the danger that defines it? Timothy Treadwell didn't just film bears. He performed for them, spoke to them, laughed with them, pleaded, praised, confessed. Sometimes, in the hours of footage recovered from Katmai, he seems calm, almost meditative, sitting quietly beside a 1,000-pound grizzly, whispering affirmations. Other times, he unravels, rants against park rangers, curses the government, cries about betrayal, heartbreak, loneliness. He filmed it all. He rarely turned the camera off. To understand Timothy Treadwell's death, we have to examine what led to it. Not just the environmental conditions, but the psychological ones. He was not a scientist. He had no formal background in animal behavior. What he did have was conviction, and a belief that he had found something purer, something better, than what human society had ever given him. Some experts have pointed to signs of narcissistic idealization, the belief that one has a special, even divine relationship with nature, immune to the rules that govern others. In interviews, Treadwell frequently described himself as chosen, blessed, even loved by the bears. He once said, "I will die for these animals. I will die for these wild creatures." He got his wish. There is also a strong case to be made for anthropomorphism, projecting human traits onto non-human animals. He spoke of bears as friends, good guys, and gentle spirits. But grizzlies are neither good nor evil. They are survival machines, motivated by instinct, not empathy. Treating them as moral actors creates a dangerous fiction. Yet Timothy needed that fiction. His journals reveal a man deeply disillusioned with human relationships. He felt rejected, misunderstood, and small. With the bears, he felt seen. He created a world where he belonged, free of judgment, full of meaning. The bears didn't criticize. They didn't abandon him. In his mind, they accepted him. But ethical lines blur when personal salvation is pursued through wild animals. He entered their space. He ignored federal laws designed to protect both humans and bears. He named the bears, habituated them to his presence, and returned to the same locations again and again, conditioning them to trust a species that is, statistically, their greatest threat. To conservationists, this was the ultimate transgression. Treadwell claimed to protect the bears, but by familiarizing them with humans, he may have made them more vulnerable to future poachers or to other park visitors. 2 bears died as a direct result of the 2003 attack, not for misbehavior, but because they behaved naturally in an unnatural situation. There's a deeper ethical dilemma here. Where is the line between reverence and intrusion? Is it truly love to stand so close to something wild that it forgets to fear you? And what is the cost of building trust where none should exist? Herzog, in Grizzly Man, reflects on the footage with a somber conclusion. "What haunts me," he says, "is that in all that Treadwell did, I see no understanding of the bear. I see only the reflection of himself." That may be the core tragedy. Treadwell wasn't killed by a bear he understood. He was killed by a bear he imagined. Amie Huguenard, who never appeared in his recordings, remains the silent counterweight to this obsession. She saw the danger. She feared it. And yet, she stayed. Their deaths raise difficult questions about agency, belief, and influence. How much responsibility do we bear for those who follow us into danger? Was her choice fully her own, or blurred by the strength of Timothy's conviction? The ethics of Treadwell's legacy remain polarizing. His footage has educated thousands. His passion was real, but so were the consequences. 2 lives were lost, 2 bears were shot, and a myth, that love alone can tame the wild, was shattered. In the end, this wasn't a story of harmony. It was a story of collision. between man and animal, fantasy and biology, devotion and delusion. And it left behind a question more haunting than any bear roar. What happens when the wilderness becomes a mirror and we mistake our reflection for understanding? Timothy Treadwell did not survive the wilderness, but in many ways, his story did. After his death, the recovered footage, over 100 hours of uncut, intimate bear encounters, was passed to filmmaker Werner Herzog. What emerged was Grizzly Man, a 2005 documentary that reframed Timothy's obsession through a tragic human lens. It was not a glorification. It was not condemnation. It was something harder to categorize. Part memoir, part eulogy, part warning. The film earned critical acclaim, not for spectacle, but for honesty. Viewers around the world were confronted with the rawness of Timothy's passion and the unbearable cost. In one moment, we see him gently speaking to a bear named Thumper. In the next, we hear a park ranger describe recovering what little was left of his body. The contrast is unflinching, but Grizzly Man also accomplished something important. It made people care. Treadwell's footage, for all its personal mythology, brought the bears of Katmai into living rooms around the world. His close-ups, his commentary, his childlike awe, it all helped humanize a species too often villainized in the public eye. For the first time, many saw grizzlies not just as threats, but as intelligent, nuanced animals with distinct personalities and behaviors. In that sense, Timothy succeeded. He wanted to make people love bears, and despite everything, he did. Today, the Grizzly People organization he co-founded continues to advocate for bear conservation and education. While it no longer sends individuals into the field like Treadwell once did, it serves as a digital archive of his work and a platform for safer science-based wildlife education. But the lessons of his death have also reshaped policy. In Katmai National Park, the incident prompted stricter enforcement of camping regulations. Campsites near high-density bear trails are now more closely monitored. Visitors are required to use bear-proof containers. Educational materials emphasize boundaries, physical and psychological. Rangers now use Treadwell's story in training sessions, not as legend, but as warning. In the broader field of wildlife research and ecotourism, his story sparked renewed dialogue about ethical observation. Where is the line between admiration and intrusion? How do we balance storytelling with safety? What do we owe to the animals we film, and to the people who follow our example? Among professionals, the consensus is clear. Love for wildlife must never replace respect for its danger. But Timothy's legacy isn't easily shelved into right or wrong. He gave people access to a world they never would have seen. He did it without funding, without training, without backup, just a camera and belief. And belief, however misguided, has power. Amie Huguenard, the woman who died beside him, left behind no recordings, no monologues, no film. But those who knew her say she loved deeply, that she saw the beauty in the bears, but not the illusion, that she followed Timothy not for fame, but for love. Her legacy, too, is etched into this story, not as a footnote, but as a quiet reminder that even the brave can be vulnerable. Even the careful can be lost. In the years since their deaths, others have walked into the grisly maze, but none have stayed the way he did. None have blurred the boundary between man and animal so completely, or so fatally. And perhaps that's the lasting message. The wilderness does not bend to our will. It does not reward passion. It does not offer forgiveness. But it does, in rare moments, reveal something sacred, if we're willing to observe it with humility, not control. Timothy Treadwell wanted to be the bridge between two worlds. He didn't become that. But his story, in all its beauty and tragedy, still echoes between them. And if it keeps just one person from stepping too far, too close, too blind, then maybe, in the end, he saved something after all. In the end, Timothy Treadwell left behind no final message, no last recorded words of reflection, no written goodbye, just hours of footage, of bears, of landscapes, of monologues that drifted between wonder and warning. He died believing the bears would never harm him. He died believing his purpose was sacred, and still, he died. His story is not about heroism or foolishness. It's about the high cost of idealism in a world governed by instinct, hunger, and survival. A story that begins with awe and ends with blood. But that doesn't mean it was meaningless. If you've stayed with us through this journey, thank you. Because stories like this are difficult. They challenge our beliefs. They make us uncomfortable. They force us to confront what it really means to love something wild, and what it means to lose someone to it. So here's the question. What do you take from this? Maybe it's a deeper respect for nature's boundaries, a new understanding that reverence must come with caution, that wild animals are not spiritual guides or symbols, but sovereign beings with their own rules, their own laws. Maybe it's a renewed appreciation for science, for the rangers, biologists, and wildlife experts who dedicate their lives not to romanticizing nature, but to understanding it, preserving it, and respecting its power. Or maybe it's something more personal. Maybe it's the memory of Amie Huguenard, who followed love into a place where logic warned her not to go. Maybe it's the chilling reality that devotion alone doesn't protect us from danger, that sometimes it leads us straight into its path. We tell these stories not for shock value, but because they matter, because they ask difficult questions, because they remind us that human arrogance, no matter how well-intentioned, is still a risk in a world we do not control. And because somewhere in these forests, somewhere in Katmai, the bears are still there, hunting, eating, surviving. They have no idea they were part of a global tragedy. They remember no names. They carry no blame. They are still wild, and that wildness deserves our humility. If this story moved you, taught you, or made you think, please share it. Subscribe for more true stories that reveal the tension between humans and the natural world, not to exploit it, but to understand it, to honor the real risks, and to remember those who faced them, willingly, completely, and sometimes fatally. Because for all the documentaries, books, and debates, there is still one truth no story can rewrite. The wild owes us nothing, and that's exactly why it must be respected. Thank you for reading. Stay curious, stay cautious, and above all, stay human. Long after the headlines faded, long after the documentaries aired, the terrain where Timothy and Amie died remains unchanged. The Grizzly maze is still there, its rivers winding through alder thickets, its shadows stretching long under autumn skies. The bears still walk its trails. They haven't vanished. They haven't changed. The wild, indifferent, and unburdened by our tragedies goes on. But something has changed. Timothy's story continues to ripple outward, in classrooms, conservation panels, and campfire conversations between rangers and hikers. His footage is still used in training sessions, not as cautionary horror, but as a raw and visceral reminder of what happens when lines blur between reverence and risk. And in the years since, no one else has attempted to live as he did. No one has tried to walk unarmed into the maze and stay. Not because they fear the bears, but because they now understand them better. It took 2 lives to make that lesson stick, but it stuck. And sometimes, in the strange and sorrowful math of the wild, that is the only legacy we get. Not heroism, not martyrdom, just a warning, one that came too late for them, but not too late for the rest of us.